A tiny fan, a single slot design, and just barely beyond the size of a human palm. Those were the trademarks of entry-level GPUs from the early to mid-2010s, and the HD7750 is no exception to that. So the card was considered a reasonable budget option for a few years, especially for people with a small budget and weaker power supply. In terms of gaming power, it never really was that spectacular, as it realistically wasn't meant for any hardcore gaming. But what about today? Are there still a few games that it could run? Or is it really done with gaming? Starting things off with somewhat of a light title. Here we have Total War Troy, running at 1080p with a low preset, and doing so pretty well, with almost 40 FPS on average and no stutters to speak of. So for that kind of a game, I would consider this quite playable. Moving on to the very recently released Hitman III, it was kind of strange testing it, as no matter what resolution I would choose, the FPS stays the same, mostly at around 20, so I decided to go with 1080p. But as I said, it doesn't really matter, the framerate isn't really the best no matter what. Resident Evil 3 is kind of a replacement test for the upcoming 8th installment in the series, so for this one you need to choose the absolute minimum settings available in-game, as well as 720p in terms of resolution, so the results are pretty fine in my opinion, considering the GPU it's running on, of course. Counter-Strike always ran well on these kinds of GPUs, so with the 1080p resolution and everything turned all the way down, the game gives in return 84 FPS on average. So not quite the 100 frames that most people would like to see in these kinds of games, but pretty close, and you can always reduce the resolution to get above that figure. Shadow of the Tomb Raider doesn't really like 1GB GPUs that much, so as seen here, there isn't that much left to turn down in order to get even better FPS. But it wasn't really meant to run on this card neither, so you could play it like this of course, but only if you really must do that. Although a few years old now, Kingdom Come Deliverance still represents a great benchmark for any PC hardware. So with the 7750, you can expect to use a 1440 by 900p resolution, with all the settings turned all the way down. So to finish off today's benchmark list with another quite VRAM intensive game, and although the average frame rates sound like playable, it really isn't, as this game realistically can't be played with such a small number of frames, but I was generally surprised how it ran. I expected much worse. As for the games it can run, it runs them okay, considering the age of the card and the purpose it was meant for at release. It still holds up quite well, but I wouldn't really recommend to buy one, if it isn't for esports games only, as the games are getting more and more demanding, and this GPU just isn't good enough for that. So to finish off the video, I have a small verdict consisting of the positive and negative sides of this GPU. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and that I will see you in my next GPU review.